All right. Well, can you hear me okay? Am I good? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming and welcome to our inaugural Digital Scholarship Symposium at Iowa State University. I'm really excited to have you here today. I'm excited for this event. This is an inaugural collaboration between the library and the Center for Excellence in Arts and Humanities. And we started planning this many months ago and are so excited to see it turn into this and to see such a great community forming already around digital scholarship at Iowa State and in the state of Iowa in general. Um, so I'm not going to talk too long. I'm just going to kind of tell you the lay of the land here. We have 4 panelists that are going to give really exciting presentations. And our moderator for those is going to be Hannah Skates-Cutler, who's our Associate University Librarian for Academic Services at Iowa State University. She'll introduce each panelist before they speak. Each panelists will speak for about 10 minutes, but we ask that you hold all questions until the end. So we'll have plenty of time for questions. This session lasts an hour and a half. So we'll kick it off with some kind of larger general questions and then open it up to the audience for the last 30 minutes to ask questions. So be thinking, write down your questions and definitely chime in at that point. But I think we're ready to go. So I'm going to hand it over to Hannah at this point and we'll get started. Hello. Yeah. All right. Well, I'd like to extend my welcome as well. I'm really excited to see this space used in this way and to see familiar faces, not so familiar faces. This is really heartwarming. Before I jump in with introductions, for folks who do not know where the restrooms are, those are down this hallway. The closest one, I guess, is down this hallway, and to your left is the women's and family restrooms, and to your right would be the men's restroom. If you need any assistance, I'm sure one of the folks in the back would be willing to direct you. Okay. So with that, I would like to introduce our first panelist for this morning, Björn Andersson, the Associate Professor of Art History at the School of Art and Art History and Design at the University of Iowa. Björn Andersson received an MA and PhD degrees in classical art and archaeology from the University of Michigan. As a specialist in the study of material culture and visual interaction in the ancient Mediterranean and Western Asia, he has taught a variety of courses in ancient art and archaeology. His publications focus on art and archaeology of ancient Arabia and Persia. He is a co-director as well of the new Exploring Continuity and Transition and for the Southern Jordan project, which aims to investigate the long-term changes and continuities in the region from the Iron Age to the Islamic period. And with that, I'll turn it over to Björn to give us a presentation entitled Teaching Art History and Generative AI.
Thank you very much, Hannah. You guys hear me okay? Great. Okay. This title slide was made by Generative AI, by the way, and you might notice several spelling errors, including my name. Here's the prompt I gave it there. A title slide for a 13:9 PowerPoint, teaching art history, and that's what you get. So I'm a member of a faculty group at Iowa. It's called the Generative AI Community of Practice, and it's been going on all year as faculty are kind of trying to work with AI and figure out how to bring it into the classroom. And I have several colleagues teaching specialist classes about AI, like AI and ethics or business AI, things like that. I decided that instead of teaching a class about AI, I was just going to try and bring it in a regular class and see how to use it. So I'm just going to walk you through kind of my stumbling efforts over the semester to see what happened. And part of it was that in December of last year, we had an email telling us that Microsoft Copilot was now available for all university faculty and students. And I thought, well, if the university's saying go nuts, then I'm going to go nuts. So that's what I did. And in my 2 classes this semester, both of them, the first assignment I gave them, which had nothing to do with either Greek art or the art of Mesopotamia, was this assignment, and it's too long to read, but the assignment was, I'll just give you a little bit from the middle. I want you to generate several images of people doing things. Simple is fine. For example, generate an image of a professor meeting with a student about a grade, come up with 3 or 4 different prompts like this, running them a few times each. And then I wanted them to kind of look at the output and think about what sorts of things occurred. And then I asked them to mix in some adjectives, like what happens if you add in modifiers about age or weight or complexion or gender or race and things like that. So just these are some of the examples that I gave them of a professor meeting with a student about a grade. And one thing I've learned from the AI is all men have short beards. And and then I also gave them this one to think about that this is one of these problems that AI doesn't know how to take no for an answer. So if you say, don't give me an image of a cat on a skateboard, you will get an image of a cat on a skateboard. Absolutely. So the prompt, if you can't read it, says a cat who lives in a world where skateboards do not exist. He's never heard of skateboards and is definitely not riding one. And this assignment, what I was thinking of was just kind of get the students familiar with it and also kind of see what they felt about it. And they were horrified. I have several kind of excerpts. I'll summarize them. It's too much to read, and I don't know if you can even see them on the screens. But there was a lot of concern about the very whiteness that would seem to be kind of the default option, and things like, oh, if I ask for a teacher and it's a man, he's standing in front of a science chalkboard. And if I ask for a teacher and it's a woman, she's in a kindergarten classroom, these sorts of observations. So my students were horrified. And they were also troubled with more, I guess you could say, insidious things like if I ask for overweight people, they go from happy to sad. Or one noted here that you could not be Korean and body inclusive or plus sized and female. It would have kind of only give you one modifier at a time, which was interesting. I did one last night, generate an image of a professor with ADHD. And at this point, Copilot has certain boundaries. So it says, I don't want to do that. And if you say sometimes like, have a professor talking to a morbidly obese student, it says, well, I don't want to make someone feel bad, so I'm not going to do that. And again, there's this kind of latent value system that horrified most of my students. So these are just some examples here of some of the things. A lot of them noted these really perfectly slim people and felt very alienated and concerned about that. So the end result of this was, I don't think any of my students wanted to touch AI ever again after this assignment. And I don't know if any of you noticed this. This is about a month ago in the news that Google's image generating software ran into problems. This was a prompt for a 1943 German soldier, and they were trying to make this. They were trying to deal with the kind of race and gender bias, and so they gave us lots of German soldiers who, of course, would be impossible, as you see here. And I should mention too, these were my classes have a lot of art students in them. And I thought it would be interesting to test bias by looking at images rather than text outputs. And it seems like they were really apparent in just seeing kind of how these groups of images worked. As far as using it for class, I had hopes. And the pot on the left is by a pot painter named Ezekias, ancient Greek. And on the right are some examples where I said, make a Greek pot, and I gave it a specific shape, and I tried to be really specific. I said, make it look as much like Ezekias as possible. And so here's a couple of the different outputs that it gave me. I mean, I think maybe for a bad souvenir shop in Athens, you could pull this off, right? But it's still a long way from ancient Greek pot painting. And interestingly as well, when I get into Mesopotamia and further east, the kind of the accuracy and quality really starts to go down. So I said, give me a stele, a stone block like you have here, that's very close to the victory stele of Naram-Sin in Akkadian style. These are Mesopotamian places and periods. And I have found that it's closer when we're dealing with kind of European things. And then as we move out of Europe, then the adherence gets a little bit further away, I guess I would say. So that's been an interesting takeaway. Also, I haven't really found a good use for doing this in class, and I had some kind of hopes that we would do that, but it's been so unpredictable, and that we could go back into the conversation of kind of why AI is flawed. But I don't know that conversation needs much more fuel after the first assignment. Excuse me. This is an underwater dredging system. It's basically a vacuum cleaner that you use in underwater archaeology. And I was trying to put together a slide of this for the class. And so I said, oh, well, I can use AI to make me a image of an underwater dredge. That's what it's called. It's basically a big long pipe that comes out of a boat. And then you've got a tube on the end. It's over where it says sand suction, and you kind of vacuum and things go through the tube. So I was looking, and I tried to be specific again. This was my underwater dredge that I got. And there's some scuba divers down there with tridents. I'm not sure why. So still some issues there. The faculty group I'm part of, this generative community of practice, gave us an article to read that it's a preprint from December of 2023, so brand new stuff. And if anybody wants, I can give them the reference afterwards. But this goes through kind of using AI responsibly in the classroom, and it has a really interesting scale in it. And I sat down and at least talked to my students about this. So you can see there's 5 colors. These are 5 different levels of a scale, and it's probably too small to read, but I can summarize. A level 1 be no AI is allowed. And level 5 is the AI does the whole assignment. And then the other ones in between are some part of that gradation. So maybe the AI assists you in getting ideas or bibliography. Maybe it helps you in editing something you've written, things like that. So I sat down at the class and I said, look, we've written one paper so far. And the way the paper is structured is that it kind of builds in these homework assignments, find bibliography, read it, find some sources, generate a thesis. So with the first one we did ourselves, let's try the second with the AI. And so these are just some examples of things we've found have been getting better. This was generate some bibliography for an advanced undergraduate research paper on the portraiture of the Roman Emperor Trebonianus Gallus, who you see there. The sources should be peer-reviewed publications in academic journals, chapters, vetted volumes, or monographs. It's okay if they're in other languages. I'd like at least 6 good sources because that's what I asked them for. And this isn't bad. If you aren't that granular, you'll get a lot of Wikipedia and Encyclopedia Britannica. But this was something that they learned, like, okay, it can actually give me some good starting places. Another thing that it can do, and this is Microsoft Edge has it built in as part of the browser. So if you open a PDF in Edge, you can say, please read this PDF and summarize it for me. And we had some interesting observations about that. For example, here I asked it to summarize, and it just read the table of contents and summarized the table of contents. So then I had to tell it, no, please start on page 2 and summarize. And if you can see over at the right, there's a nice summary of kind of the main points. It talks about imperial ideology, Zoroastrian influence, cultural synthesis, things like that. One of my students noticed that it seems like it only reads the first 2 pages, which we thought was very funny, that, it's as lazy as they are, maybe. No, they work harder than it does, but it kind of gets going, and then it's, for some reason, decides not to continue reading the rest of the article. But, this was a tool that they thought was useful. And then the other thing that we found is useful is I'll have them feed in their thesis and say, can you suggest improvements? So this is a list of improvements. And what we've found, and I think this is pretty well known, is AI is better at kind of editing than generating. So the generation, as you saw, is kind of all over the place and has a lot of flaws. But if you say, can you help my writing be better? It will do a fairly good job with that. So this is something that we're using, and we're still at the last few weeks of term. So I'm interested to see how it shakes out for the final of the paper. The last thing I'll just mention is one other thing I've found that's fun. We have class projects that are studio art or writing projects or anywhere in between. And I had a student who wrote a play set in ancient Mesopotamia. And I said, well, wouldn't it be cool if this is like a graphic novel? But he's not an art student. He didn't want to do that. So we thought, well, what if we have the AI generate the graphic novel images for your dialogue? So this was the sort of thing, it's kind of in comic book style, a Mesopotamian king sitting with his advisors holding an image of a statue, right? And kind of Spider-Man style. And then we had to have them laughing, and then we had to have them crying, right? And so these are the sorts of kind of fun ways that we can bridge some gaps, particularly between studio and traditional scholarship. Okay, I'm probably out of time. Am I out of time, Hannah? I am out of time, so I better stop there. But thank you very much, and I will pass the mic.
All right, thank you so much, Björn. Our next speaker that you'll hear from is Megan Jeanette Myers, Associate Professor of Spanish here at Iowa State University. Dr. Megan Jeanette Myers is the author of Mapping Hispaniola, Third Space in Dominican and Haitian Literature, which was published in 2019, and co-editor of The Border of Light's Reader, Bearing Witness to Genocide in the Dominican Republic, published in 2021. Myers directs the Language and Cultures for Professions, Professions program at Iowa State, and was a 2021-2022 U.S. Fulbright scholar to the Dominican Republic. Myers recently co-edited a special issue of Hispania on digital humanities in Spanish and in Portuguese. So I'm super excited to hear the upcoming presentation entitled "The World at Their Fingertips, ArcGIS Story Maps in the Spanish Classroom."
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you so much to the team at, further away. Okay. I'm gonna hold that right up to my face so you can hear me. Well, great. Well, thank you so much to DSI team for the invitation. It's really exciting to be here this morning and also to share kind of the table with our colleagues from the University of Iowa. So thank you so much for the invitation. I'm going to talk a little bit. Do you want me to do anything with this to get the PowerPoint on before I start? I have it pulled up here. Yeah, I didn't change anything from the setting before. Sorry, we'll pause. I'll start. You're totally good. I'll start talking as we're going, but I'm going to give in my short presentation this morning, kind of less examples, and I'm not going to pull up the specific projects or examples of the work that my students did in the classroom, but I'm going to talk a little bit more about the why behind assigning these projects for students in language and cultural classrooms on campus. So the reasons behind the digital projects and the assignments itself, and a little bit discuss how it fits into humanities courses, right, across different disciplines. I also want to contextualize this project in this brief presentation and mention this idea of having this global mindset in the language and cultural classroom. I think this idea of engaging with a global mindset and kind of setting up this framework for students has shifted in the last 5 to 10 years, in large part in the post-COVID era, because we know that students don't need to travel necessarily to experience the world or to practice their language skills, to come in contact with individuals from different cultures, right? So one example is that in World Languages and Cultures, we have something that's required for many students where it's a global internship. Well, we've changed the language around that so that students don't actually need to go abroad to complete a global internship. That global internship might be virtual. That global internship might be a local internship that has global tendencies, right? So thinking about some of those ideas, and this project that I'll talk about today, that's an ArcGIS StoryMaps project in one of my Spanish classes, is a great example of a geographic and digital connection that my students make through this specific Proyecto Global or global project. Okay, so just to give a little bit more of a background, so you're a little bit aware of the curriculum, the programming, and the class that I use this project in. The Languages and Cultures for Professions program at Iowa State, which we call LCP, was founded actually in 2002, 2003, which makes it one of the flagship national programs in Languages and Cultures for Professions, or the field more commonly is known as Languages for Specific Purposes. It's a secondary major program for students who study French, German, or Spanish, and a minor program for students who are in Chinese studies or Russian studies. Something interesting to keep in mind, especially for those of y'all who are at Iowa State here, is that starting in 2023, it became a program available to any student at Iowa State. Previously, it was really targeted towards students in the College of Business or the College of Engineering or in CALS, and now any student can have this as a secondary major program, so an additional major or a minor program. There are lots of reasons for that, but it's also allowed us to start these new partnerships, for example, with computer science for students who are doing a BA in computer science, right? How can we see language and cultural studies as a really competitive add-on for these students with other disciplinary specific programs at Iowa State? So the question that kind of guides this digital project I'll talk briefly about today is the following. What do instructors already do in language courses that help prepare students as global professionals? So I'm going to talk about a couple of the skills that students inherently practice in the language and cultural classroom. One of these, obviously my focus today, is digital literacy, right? So how do I teach digital literacy in my courses, and what are students already doing just inherently, right, in the language classroom that allows them to practice these skills? Another example of a skill like this that I talk about students naturally practicing in the space of the language and culture classroom is networking skills. That's another great example, right? So just by nature of the activities we assign in the 100 to 300 plus language and cultural classroom, students would practice things like using appropriate body language, culturally appropriate body language, right? Knowing and learning names, displaying listening skills. These are really important social skills. And if we don't practice them and make these skills, this learning of these skills and practice of these skills transparent, students are missing out, right? We're losing that really key opportunity. And it goes this exact same for digital literacy skills as well. So I'm going to start from the bottom just because this kind of connects to what I was just saying. But one thing that I really stress, especially in the language classroom, is that as instructors, we talk about and assess competencies across the board in similar ways. So when we talk about linguistic or language competencies, students might say on their CV, I have an intermediate level of French. Great, that's transparent. We know more or less where your level is. But how do we talk about digital competencies, and how can students kind of approach discussing competencies in a similar way? How could they and how should they talk to employers about their skills in Excel or their skills in XML, right? Or their skills in Omeka, right? Whatever the different digital platform is, how can we encourage students to assess and discuss their competencies in similar ways, in ways they're already using to discuss linguistic competencies maybe? So just as some examples that don't relate directly to the project in ArcGIS, I also engage AI and take advantage of these kind of cross-campus synergies that we also have at Iowa State when we discuss AI in the humanities. And I see language courses as an ideal environment to, in particular, point out what ChatGPT, for example, cannot do. One project that I love is that in the Spanish for Global Professionals course, which is the course I use this project in that I'll talk about in a second, that we do is we use ChatGPT to ask it to create us a cover letter, right? They have some information in their prompt about the job they're seeking, about some of their qualifications, and then we look at the output, right? Tons of issues in terms of just kind of cultural inadequacies. There are lots of issues with the Spanish that's produced. Oftentimes it's either way too formal or not formal enough. It's like, hey, Senor Carlos, these are not appropriate ways. So we then discuss together, they use this example, their output from ChatGPT, and they use the example that they wrote using the techniques that we've talked about in class, and we compare the two. And one of my favorite activities is we paste both kind of on the wall, print them out, and do kind of a gallery walk, and students get to guess, oh yeah, okay, this is obvious. This is the one ChatGPT wrote for you, and this is the one that you wrote. How do we kind of maybe merge the two? What can we learn from this exercise, right? And also lots of interesting discussions about English in the global workplace, right? When we talk about language in terms of what ChatGPT does or what these kind of language programming platforms do for us, we know there are some serious issues and questions that need to be raised. So it's really important for students to have a critical eye when they're doing that type of interpreting or translation work. Another kind of key point here is that a lot of these tech heavy or digitally forward course projects really do an excellent job of coupling soft skills with the hard skills that employers seek. And I'll give some specific examples of that. Okay, so this is the project that I use in my Spanish for Global Professionals class. We use ArcGIS StoryMaps for students to launch a US-based company in a Spanish-speaking country or market. So the example that I pulled these screenshots from here, just so I'm not wasting too much time messing around on the examples and ArcGIS, although it might be the most interesting part for some of y'all, I'm happy to share the link to the students' projects. This group, for example, launches kombucha, the GT kombucha line in Argentina. So they have specific requirements for the project, but I really give them a lot of space to use different visuals and really create this multimodal narrative in the way that they see fit. And ArcGIS StoryMaps in particular is really a simple platform for students to use. The tools are really, I think, intuitive. So you can see here the students have to use Excel to plot 5 different locations and coordinates that they discuss, and they connect to launching the company in this geographic region. This one in particular, on the far right side there, you can see students give kind of a breakdown of how kombucha is made. This is all their own work in Spanish. They did this amazing short video to show the actual process with their own images they created. And I let students really kind of take the rein there in terms of how they want to display and share that information. Some interesting kind of notes here is that I also use this as a way to practice their Excel skills in class, right? If we don't talk about how we build their digital literacy skills, they're not going to do it, right? So we use Excel. They have to or Google Sheets to create 5 different locations and coordinates before they're plotting them in ArcGIS. We talk about population statistics. So we calculate raw numbers and percentages. We compare these percentages in the different Spanish-speaking countries represented in the project groups. And then they produce 2 to 3 different types of charts based on that data that illustrate this information. Right. So there's a lot that goes into, I talk about this to show there's a lot that goes into the project before students are actually working in ArcGIS StoryMaps. Okay. Okay, on time. Perfect. So again, just coming back full circle to thinking about integrating these 21st century professional skills. In particular, how do we integrate these skills into our learning objectives? I'm also a faculty affiliate in our Center for Excellence in Learning and Teaching. So something I'm always thinking about is being incredibly transparent about what we're asking students to do and if it's an achievable goal, right? I like to talk about SMART learning objectives. So they're time bound, they're measurable, right? All these different, this acronym to help us think through what we're asking students and expecting students to do at the end of a course. So my example here is that a learning objective, if you're having this type of project, this type of digital project as a really kind of important NCAP or capstone project in your course, instead of having a learning objective like students create a final project using StoryMaps, okay, what do we want them to do here? I want them to accurately present population statistics visually and textually, right? So kind of thinking that through, and we're backwards designing these types of projects in the classroom, I find is really important. And then finally, just stressing that these activities don't decentralize, and in my case, language and cultural content or humanities content in particular and in general, but they instead are adding value-added skills to the course and are making students more competitive job applicants and more and ready in different ways to enter the job market in their discipline-specific majors. And with that, I will pass it on. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Myers. Our next panelist is Nikki J.D. White, Digital Humanities Librarian at the University of Iowa. Nikki has supported or has been supporting students and faculty in their DH or Digital Humanities projects at the University of Iowa Libraries for over 10 years. She has led workshops and 1 semester hour courses on data visualization, data preparation, research poster design, and digital exhibits, and has given trainings as well on data handling, web development, and text analysis in faculty taught courses. We will be hearing from her in her presentation entitled Iterative Design of Digital Exhibit Instruction. Thanks. Oh, yeah.
Hello. 6 inches. Am I in there? Can you hear me? Awesome. Okay. Hi, I'm Nikki, as Hannah said. Thank you so much for having us here. I'm very excited to see the space and to meet some of our colleagues from across Iowa and especially here at ISU. So thank you so much for hosting this event. So yes, I am a digital humanities librarian. So I'm not a faculty, and I do teach, and it is often more sort of in the zone of training or technical training and hands-on kind of, here's how you do this with this software, here's software you might consider, and kind of how to think about how you want to do your project or what you might do. So I work primarily with faculty and grad students. I'm in the Digital Scholarship and Publishing Studio, which has been in its current form since 2015. We do a wide variety of programming and project support, with instruction being one of those things. So we have a short course series that are 1 semester hour technical courses. So I've taught about data viz, how to build digital exhibits, things like that. Occasionally we do workshops that are kind of same thing, sort of walking people through a software and kind of troubleshooting through how they're using it. And so I'm going to take a more technical approach, I think, in how I talk about this course. But it's one that I've been working with Dr. Jen Sterling on for about 5 years now, which seems crazy to me to think, gosh, it's since 2017. It's longer than 5 years. Don't remind me. So in this course, this is a class taught by Dr. Jen Sterling. She's in our American Studies program in sports studies. And she worked on a exhibit in our library gallery that was centered around women's 6-on-6 basketball in the state of Iowa. And she was interested in having students do kind of related work and engage with the materials in the archives and with the history of athletics, especially in Iowa, and to be able to develop narratives around those materials. And so we put together initially a companion to the exhibit. And it's developed into an annual project that her students do in this class, Women's Sport and Culture. So she teaches the class, she sets the curriculum, but I've been working closely with her to develop the technical sides of it and what that workflow is like for students. So I'm going to be doing a much less exciting kind of work through. Like, this is kind of how we organize this class and what the pieces are to kind of make everything kind of flow through. So when we started, so the gallery displayed 6-on-6 basketball and legacy of women, girls and women's sports in Iowa exhibit in the gallery in 2017. And then it was a traveling gallery for a year. And at the same time, she developed the course and this project and kind of set the format of how we do it. In 2020, we did have to transition it to all virtual, which was a really interesting experience. And then in 2022, we've restarted the course after a break in 21. And it's been split to a 2,000 and 3,000 level course. So everyone's in the same classroom, but there are grad students and honors undergraduates taking at the 3,000 level with additional assignments that they work through with me. So the structure of the class is that we have an Omeka site. So for those of you who haven't worked with it before, Omeka is a digital platform for developing archival collections and exhibits. So the general structure of it is that you have you upload media and documents and into items, right, which have Dublin core metadata attached. And then you can organize those in collections, which can also have metadata attached. And you can display those items then in narrative exhibits that have sort of a paginated structure. So every semester that we teach the class, there's an update cycle for the course. So we get together, we say, okay, here's all the updates that need to happen on the site. We clear out any legacy content that's still in there. And we add all the new users to the site ahead of time. We discuss sort of what kind of workflow issues did we run into last time? Were there things that caused confusion? Were there things where people were kind of stepping on each other's toes? And what can we do to work around that? Over time, we've changed the structure of it several times, such that there have been times when we had several separate exhibits that small groups were working on. The most recent structure has been that the 2,000 students are working in a single exhibit together, and each of them has a structured page that follows a certain formula, right? So they all kind of know you're going to have an item and a description, and it's going to follow this sort of rhetorical structure, and it's going to be within this place in the rest of the exhibit. So anything that we need to change to make that happen, we set up ahead of time. And then we make sure our samples are ready so that they have things to refer to. So here's an example of what like a partial page would look like for a sample, so that they kind of see, here's the layout, here's going to be your item, your caption, all these different things, and how it flows into the rest of the exhibit. During the course, kind of, as my colleague was saying, there's a lot of work and preparation that goes in before they ever reach the technical piece of it. We have found that it works best to show people the technical pieces, should give them a preview at the very beginning of the class. So here's the example exhibit. Here's what we're going to be creating together. But then not worry too much about walking them through the technicals until like the day of. It's like, okay, we have this assignment now to create items. Nikki's going to come in and show you how to create items. So ahead of time, they visit the archives. They learn with the archival librarians how to work with the materials there, how to find things. And then I come to class and get everyone sorted. So we get everyone logged in. We troubleshoot that quite a lot. I walk them through, here's how you navigate around the site, right? So they're all on laptops. We're in a tile classroom, which has screens around so everyone can kind of follow along. And we walk them through, here's the basic navigation of the site, how to get to the things that you need. And then here we're going to do a demonstration now of here's how you would enter an item. So they have a demo item essentially that we walk through and have them write the description, write the metadata out in following a formula that Jen's put together. So they can kind of practice the process with us there to help them. And then they can work on it separately after they've had time to go into the archives and find the actual materials they want with an idea in mind of this is what it's like to enter stuff in the site. These are the things that I need to know and what might look good in the page. And once we hit that point about students are still contacting Jen for any content and course help. And then if they have technical problems with the site, then they have my email. Once they've all had an opportunity to put items in and do that assignment, we start them out on the exhibit process. So I go in and demonstrate, this is what here's the sample, here's how you access it, and then walk them through the process of like, here's how you're going to create your page. Here's how you can access your things. Here's how you can kind of plug this in, and they can follow along and do it with me. We often have work days kind of following that where people are just working on their projects and cycling through. So we have some of them go up to the archives to look for materials or kind of select and curate what they want. And other people are working on the site. And I'm kind of floating in the room to help them out. At the very end of the class, then they have an informal in-class presentation of the exhibit so they can see what everyone has done and how their exhibit all flows together in one piece. And there's been discussion from the beginning. There was some intent that we could add these to the public site. Ultimately, that has not happened up to this point, but with the kind of idea of we'd like for this to be an option, if it's possible. We have students, if they're interested in having their material be public, we have them sign a FERPA release form so that we're compliant on that. So it's a whole kind of set of things through the course. Since we split the class, the advanced students are focusing more on kind of archival representation of materials. And so we split the class on 2 days. In mid-semester, I take just the 3,000 students and give them a walkthrough of like, here's how you would plan a project independently as though they were coming in for a studio project consult. So looking through, here are some of the Omeka features that weren't available to you working on the group project that you could implement if you're interested. Here are kind of the possibilities. And then at the end of the project life, at the end of the class, I meet with each of them individually to talk about what do you want to do with your project in the future? Is this something you want to continue working on? Is this in developing an exhibit of their own? They're able to kind of choose their own topic for their final project and select anything from the archives that they're interested in working on. But then some of them are often interested in continuing to work on it later. So making it available publicly just to say, this is something I did in this class to show. And others are interested in continuing it as an ongoing project. So that final class session is an opportunity to kind of talk them through, here are the opportunities and directions you can go with it if you're interested and what that will look like. After the class is over, we export and archive all the materials that have been developed by the class. And any plans that I've made with the 3000 level students, we execute those. So I help them migrate to an external Omeka site if that's what they're interested in. Sometimes we take a static snapshot and send that to them. And sometimes they're like, I don't care, man. It's a great, I got an A. And they're like, you can close it. It's fine. So over time, as we've tweaked and edited the project, what we've noticed, some of these I think maybe are kind of obvious, having step-by-step examples for them to reference. So like both walking them through it in person so they can see, but then having something they can reference in their own time to double check their work. Has made a big difference, and doing a small piece at a time, because there's so many different components, like creating the exhibit and the narrative, but then also the selection and curation of items, the metadata description of items, working in the archives for the first time, navigating the Omeka platform. Working mostly with grad students, I've been kind of accustomed to showing someone the basics and then being like, okay, let me know if you have problems. And it's been a study in being patient and really stepping through a thing at a time. Like, this is how you do this. This is how these things fit together. Another serious thing that we've done a lot of grappling with using Omeka as a platform has been what I think of as crowd control. So essentially that having a lot of people entering data on the same site at once can cause problems on the site. Everything from people accidentally editing each other's work, which has happened a couple times, to being afraid of editing each other's work, and so kind of going off in weird directions, or performance issues with the site itself. So too many people uploading images at once, for example, and kind of making it freeze up. So we ultimately broke those work sessions into shifts so that we don't have everyone working on it once. We've tested out ideas of like, maybe if we have people in a Google Sheet entering data, it'll be a little less confusing. It was not, it was more confusing. So we've gone back to Omeka items. But overall, less through technical barrier or kind of curbs, and more through training and kind of walking them through it and assuring them they're going in the right direction. I think it's really polished out well, such that we've had a lot fewer problems of people getting confused and stepping on each other's toes. Oops. Well, yes, thank you. Another complexity of publishing student group work in particular is has been kind of issues around FERPA release and how to manage that when you have people working together in a group. Because there's kind of an idea of like, well, you need everyone's sort of sign on. We've discussed the idea of like, maybe we should separate things out more so that people have a little more autonomy of like just their little piece. And on the other hand, there's been concern about like, that seems like a lot of scope for an undergrad when they're already like learning so much new material at once. And so possibly like just letting go of the idea of publishing and kind of keeping the focus on like constructing a page that uses multimedia in a nice holistic way. But yeah, these are things we're still working on. I anticipate we're going to be teaching it again next fall. So the site's ready. And yeah, I'm interested in any thoughts or questions people have. So, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nikki. And finally, our very own Erin Ridnour, Digital Scholarship Librarian here at Iowa State University. Erin leads the Tracing Race at ISU initiative and was the coordinator and co-PI for the Council of Library and Information Resources grant-funded digitization project, Avian Archives of Iowa Online. Short version of that is Avian. Thank you for creating something pithier. She collaborates with students, faculty, and staff on digital projects and teaches workshops and class sessions on geospatial humanities, text analysis, and digital storytelling. She will be providing a presentation entitled Storytelling with Digital Maps, introducing honor students to geospatial humanities.
Thank you, Hannah. Is that fair enough? Okay. So as Hannah mentioned, I'm a digital scholarship librarian here at Iowa State. And it sounds like how Nikki described her teaching at University of Iowa is very similar to most of my teaching. So working with faculty to teach particular technical skills in the classroom or introduce specific platforms. However, honors seminars here at Iowa State are an opportunity that I have as a staff member to teach a full course. So I'm going to share a little bit about an honors seminar that I have taught and hope to teach in the future, introducing students to geospatial humanities through the StoryMaps platform. So a little bit about the course structure. I chose to do this seminar as a half semester, so an 8 weeks course for 1 credit. And I did 2-hour once a week class sessions, and I structured it as the first hour would be discussion about readings and also maybe some in-class activities as a group. And then the second hour would be a lab style activity. So the students working through a tutorial to teach them a particular skill. I had a few short assignments sprinkled throughout the 8 weeks, including a map reflection assignment and a digital project proposal. And then I ended the semester with a final StoryMaps project. So each student doing their own story map. And just an overview of some of the major learning outcomes I was shooting for. So I wanted students by the end to be able to critically assess maps and data sources that they encountered in the wild, and then how to, have a basic understanding of data structures and how to interpret and visualize data. And then also how to plan, create, present, and reflect on a digital project from start to finish. So I'll just share a few of the activities that I did throughout the class to try and achieve some of these objectives. So the first is a map literacy activity to assess existing map projects that are out there and their underlying data sources. I have a few examples here to show kind of the variety and breadth of the projects that we explored. And then I had a worksheet asking students a series of questions about these projects. So questions like who created this project and who funded the creation of the project? What are the data sources they used? And is there anything about the creator of that data source that would be an issue of concern for you as far as, motivation, bias, things like that? What is the map's purpose or argument? What deliberate visualization choices did the author make, and what were the effects of those choices? So I think a good example of that last discussion is this New York Times project here, which is an extremely detailed map of the 2016 election. And one thing the students noticed about this map is that the color scale choices made it seem more polarized than our politics may actually be, because a 49-51 split was still either red or blue. And the students said, well, I think it should be purple if it's that close. And so this really made it seem more extreme than it actually is. And if you click on the pop-ups of the precincts, there's actually no third-party candidate data either. So it's just an either or choice. A couple other examples here. This one down in the bottom called Mapping Magic is on a platform called History Pin, which is a really interesting crowdsourced mapping project. So anyone can host a project and then invite others or anyone in the public to add data, images, pins to their map. Up here at the top is called Enchanting the Desert. This is an interactive digital monograph. The source material for this monograph is a series of commercial lantern slide photographs that were used as a traveling presentation promoting the Grand Canyon. And this author added maps showing the spatial area that each photograph covered in the view of the Grand Canyon, and then also essays alongside that. And then the last project down here in the corner is one that we spent a little bit more time on. We read an article about. This is the Mapping Inequality Project at University of Richmond. This project is digitizing the Homeowners Loan Corporation redlining maps for the entire country, and then kind of laying them on top of, you know, the full country map. And then there are actually like new essays explaining the housing situation in a lot of the cities across the country. I really like this project for a lot of reasons, but one of them is that this project has really great documentation, and it also provides the underlying data to the public for reuse in a number of different formats. So you can access the scanned images of the original maps. You can access the geospatial data in a format that you can upload into a GIS program and reuse. So I love teaching with this project. A couple other activities we did in class around structuring, cleaning, and understanding data sets. It's a bunch of spreadsheets, but this first one down here, I called it a build your own data set activity. And we started with a completely blank spreadsheet, and the class worked together to build a data set of pizza places and Ames. So they had to talk through things like, who's my audience? So students, they decided, were using this. And what data would they need for students to be able to make decisions about which pizza place they wanted to go to? Because every column has to be its own data point. Anything that you want to be able to visualize has to be in your data set. Your data has to be clean in order to be able to filter on particular criteria. So the students were trying to narrow down the criteria that a student may need to choose a pizza place. They decided whether or not it accepted dining dollars was one of the criteria that they wanted to use. One thing they struggled with was how to represent the price. And they landed on what the price of a medium one-topping pizza was, and then they would be able to kind of filter by price range once it got into the mapping platform. So I think this is a really interesting activity to show like what all you need to think through from the beginning if you're building a data set from scratch in order for your visualizations to actually be effective. The second activity over here is one that's actually built in. It's provided by Esri. So this is a data set that shows fatalities from the 1916 Easter Rising insurrection in Dublin. The tutorial provided by Esri doesn't really encourage the students to actually interrogate the data set before they kind of jump in and start visualizing and going through the steps. So we took a look at this spreadsheet first. You'll notice there are fields missing. Maybe you can see there are fields with data missing. So we talked about what that might do to your visualization. There are a number of fields that would require a standardized vocabulary if you actually hoped to kind of group and filter your data. So cause of death needed to be a set number of terms. So gunfire, you know, there are a number of different options there. And then down here, we've got the same thing with affiliation. Were they a civilian? Were they a volunteer? All of those things need to be standardized in order to visualize. And then we did go through some best practices of data visualization. So paying attention to accessibility, especially making good color choices so people with color blindness can still understand your data. Choosing an effective base map so that your data is visible. Picking a color scale that you can actually discern between the different color choices, things like that. And then for, I would say about 3 weeks at the end of the semester, the students focused on their own final story map project. So like the readings and the lab activities that I chose all built skills towards this final project. And then we had several steps to complete this project. They were asked to create a project proposal. So a 1 to 2 page write-up of what they were hoping to map, and then a list of 3 to 5 sources, you know, preliminarily that they were hoping to consult for their data, as well as an outline of their their different sections of their story. And then they came to class to present that and get feedback. And the students asked each other questions about how they would do a particular thing. And then the final story map itself, I asked them to include at least 5 major sections of their story map, incorporate at least 2 of the techniques that we explored during the lab sessions in class, and then also include any images or multimedia elements that would help enhance their story. If you're familiar with StoryMaps, it has a lot of cool visualization options. And then they would give a final presentation in class. And they would also complete a reflection paper about this whole process and responding to things like, what would I have done differently if I had had the exact data I needed for this? What worked, what didn't work? The point of this was for them to explore any topic of their choice and really experiment with the things that we had talked about in the class. So I'm going to attempt to click out. Yay. Worked. Okay, so here is the final story map collection from the class, and I'm just going to highlight a few of the ones that show some of these learning outcomes, I think. So the student chose to map abandoned structures at Ledges State Park. And I really liked, I thought this was a unique approach to a kind of beloved place in Iowa. And she had a personal family history of having great memories of going here as a kid and noticing these structures. And so one of the things I encouraged for these final projects was for students to really focus in on how to show a spatial element of something that they were really interested in. And so I thought this was a great approach to that. I'll just scroll through here a little bit. So these are her own photographs, and then she did a little research into the history of the park and these different structures. I'm going to click back, jump around just a little bit here. So this student mapped past and current residence halls on ISU campus. And I like that this student made use of our digital collections here at the library and also some publications that we have digitized on our website to find these historic buildings, some of which no longer stand on campus, and then map them alongside buildings that students are currently living in, including apartments off campus. Oops, sorry. Scrolling. So current resident halls as well. And then I'm going to jump to a fairly simple concept, mapping all of the different city parks and AIMS. What I liked about this student's project is that they utilized one of the analysis tools available in ArcGIS online that we went through in class, which was to calculate a 10-minute walking distance from each of the parks and show if you live in a particular area in Ames, here's your proximity to any one of these city parks. So I thought that was great use of that tool. And then I have a couple of examples that I think show why I thought doing the reflection paper in addition to the final project was really important. I tried to emphasize that these students should experiment. They should plan to perhaps not get what they expected when they first started. And so I need to try and move. I can't actually click on this. Maybe. I have things blocking my clicking, sorry. So this student was from Waterloo Cedar Falls, and we had talked a little bit about food deserts in one of the activities in class, and they wanted to see if they could map food access and also diversity of populations in Waterloo and Cedar Falls. And I think that this student discovered that they needed access to a lot more data, or more specifically, they didn't quite have the specific data they needed in order to make the conclusions that they were trying to draw. And so that really came out in the final presentation and the discussion and the reflection paper after this project. And a similar thing with this project about presidents versus national parks. So this student tracked which presidents created which national parks, the most national parks. They analyzed the square miles of national park space. They, tried to compare Republican and Democratic presidents to see if there was any difference. They determined there kind of wasn't. And so I think this was a great exploration for this student. And then their reflection was like, there actually wasn't as much difference, or the answer is a lot more complex than what can be mapped in a couple of maps with a couple of data sets. So I think that was a good learning outcome also. Jump back. These are my screen grabs in case my website didn't work. And then some readings that we did in the class, I would highlight Deep Maps and Spatial Narratives as one of my favorites. And if I were teaching a full 3-credit course, we'd read that whole thing. But we read a chapter, and I'm a librarian. I like to share my readings. But happy to answer any questions or chat with the rest of the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much to our wonderful panelists. We have about half an hour to open it up for all of you to ask questions that you may like to pose to an individual, the whole panel. We have Michael in the back who will be sharing the mic. So please wait for the mic if you have a question. That'll be great. So anyone would like to ask the first question? Yes, back there.
Hi, yes. So I'm at Grinnell College, and we have several classes that are starting to put in websites and different digital projects into their course evaluation. And so for those of you who are working with courses, what kind of labor goes into building up those sites, and who's mainly responsible for that? Is it the instructional faculty who's teaching the class, or is it, whoever is available to help out with that, especially with the Omeka site?
Am I on? Okay. So in the case, typically it's the faculty member. There are certain cases in which we can, host a site for a period of time. Typically, we only do that in cases where, take Omeka, for example, if what they're doing is they're having students maybe for a class or two put together an exhibit or create items or what have you. And they're not really doing anything with Neatline. They're not really doing anything that would require a paid version. If they can do it in the free version, essentially, I typically advise that they go ahead and set it up on omeka.net. Usually the processing is like the performance issues are not as bad. It gives them more control over it. And then it's something where, frankly, if they ghost us, it's not sitting on our servers. But just more generally, I think it gives them a little more flexibility. In other cases where it is like a longer running situation, or where there's a potential that we might publish it as a digital exhibit, or where they are wanting to use elements where it's like we would need to either buy the paid version, or the faculty member would have to kind of sort out like a GoDaddy site or something like that. In those cases, we tend to say we've got a dev server. Let's just put it on there. But yeah, broadly speaking, I would say we tend to advise hosting an independent site if that's a free option that's manageable. Does that answer your question?
I mean, some of the backend stuff, like setting up the users, setting up the Omeka site itself. So
Yeah.
typically we have people, as a small enough college that we could do that, but I could imagine at a larger college that there's not employees set aside to do that for everyone.
No. So when we've done that with Omeka sites, I'm typically the one helping them with that. Yeah. So, and it's fine. Yeah. Yeah. I don't really have anything to add, I guess. Yes, I usually help with that.
I could add a more kind of broadly reaching point, but first I have to say thank you for inviting me. I forgot to mention that at the beginning. I got so excited. So this has been wonderful. Yeah. So Nikki would come to my classes a few years ago. I guess pre-COVID, we were just discussing. Yeah, I would teach a digital approaches to the study of art, and we'd do some mapping, and we'd do some 3D modeling and photogrammetry and some other things like that. One thing that is, as you said, it's on the faculty member, and I realized that one of the real challenges is how much pre-planning you have to do. Like, oh, we need a site license for 25 copies of this software in this room if we can teach in this room, which we have to, there's those kind of things. So the licensing, this is not so much about pushing it online, but I think for putting it online, at least at Iowa, is actually hard because it's fairly controlled. Like there's a branding look to things, and they don't want to put things on the website that don't look right or don't kind of pass muster. So it is kind of like I'll tell students, well, go on Wix or whatever and make a website, but we can't usually host it unless it goes through a lot of hurdles. And then the other thing that I've noticed is if I teach this class in a rotation, like so maybe every 2 or 3 years, I come back and I realize, oh, that software I used last time is gone. And now I have to learn a whole new software package. And that has sort of turned me on to a little bit like, do I really want to teach this class again? Now ArcGIS has moved to a different platform, and it's not what I grew up on. So I have to kind of go figure that back out. And in the teaching, the other thing is, you mentioned this, Nikki, like going around the room. So if I say, okay, let's try this, and I'll give them a long set of kind of instructions, but maybe I forgot to press enter after one thing, then everyone in the room is going to have a meltdown at a different point, and they need to kind of rotate around. And so for one faculty with a class of like 20, it's I feel like a lot of times I'm doing less teaching and more just kind of troubleshooting the instructions that weren't good enough. That sounds really depressing. We get really great outputs, but it is a lot, you do have to just kind of put a lot of your own investment into the class, for sure.
Also wanted to add that at Iowa State as well, I think it's important to note that if a faculty member has an idea for a project like this, you're never doing it alone. In fact, we're lucky to have the DSI team and colleagues like Erin and Michael and Hannah and Olivia who help us see the project through to the end. So I think that's an important note. But the other piece I think that's maybe important to think about is I think oftentimes the goal, if we're re-articulating what the goals of the course are or the learning goals are for the students, we don't need a publishable final project, right? I mean, another project I do in my Spanish or in a Spanish course that is a textual analyses course. We did a text encoding initiative project with Hannah years ago. So it's TEI, Text Encoding Initiative, is a subset of XML code that students use to to encode literary text. And the end goal isn't really for them to see it in publishable form. We look at examples of digital archives of literature across cultures and languages, but it doesn't really so much matter how it's finally hosted in the end project. What matters is all of the work that got students there. What did it actually look like to encode literary text? What problems did we have? How did what you encode look differently than the way your classmate did it? So I think that's a really important conversation that we've had too. Like, well, do we need to get there? Do we need to see this publishable or not? Is that maybe not the goal here?
Yeah, I would second what Megan says. So in working with faculty, you would prioritize what are the digital skills that you're hoping to teach, and can we achieve that with a platform that's free and open source, or that we already have hosting support for here on campus, which I think is why I like to use StoryMaps. We have really easy access and support to all of the Esri products here on campus. We use Voyant Tools, which is a browser-based tool for text analysis that can give you visualizations immediately. There's now, hosting or additional setup that you need to do for a tool like that. So I think that's what I would tend to push towards first and encourage, like, can we choose a tool that doesn't require a lot of setup? If not, we're happy to help, do some additional setup, but I think it's prioritizing the digital skills that you're hoping to teach.
I might add too that I like the free versions because they can continue to do it after the class is over. So
I will note one thing that you want to always kind of caution your students and also caution yourself when you're looking at third-party materials and things, depending on what kind of material your students are working on, is to both kind of be aware of what the use license is for this for the material. So if you're uploading media, for example, to it, what rights are you giving that hosting site to it? And if it's something that you're ever going to want to save and archive, what kind of export options does it have? If this service were to go away in 2 years, like, and you needed that material, would you have some way of saving or exporting your material? Bouncing off of what you guys are saying, this actually just happened to me recently where, because as you know, in the Women in Sport class, kind of directing people and grappling with some of the clunkiness of Mecca has been a challenge with the students. And I had a PhD candidate reach out to me last week, and she's interested in creating an assignment where her students would kind of do a similar thing where they'd put together pages of an exhibit. And she was asking me about platforms, and she's like, what if I just did it in PowerPoint or Google Slides and had them each create a slide that has media and text, and then we put it all together? And I was kind of going, well, I wouldn't have thought of that actually, but then the more I'm thinking about it, just in terms of affordances, if it's not going to be public and you're just presenting it in class, that sounds like a great idea. Like, yeah. So I think it's easy to kind of be like, oh, I need something slick and shiny, but a lot of times something pretty straightforward can probably accomplish what you want, depending on how you're articulating the learning goals.
Hi, can you hear me? It's working. Okay. Sarah Davis from the English department. And what you just said, Nicole, segues into kind of what I was going to have you talk about, everyone on the panel, if you have something to say about it. I do try to get my students to do digital products, and because I teach communications, and of course, you know, there's more than just writing words on a paper these days, right? And what I have found is that the types of tools that I have directed students toward have become very slick, as you say, with pretty uniform templates and kind of restrictive templates. You can't go in behind and change things much. And I've discovered that my students are sort of looking at the visual design and then deciding what goes into the product, rather than looking at the content and the communication purpose and the audience and the needs and having it drive what they select in those menus. And it's becoming more and more difficult, in addition to the fact that, you know, if I have them go to Canva, yeah, they can download it, but Visme, they can't. So when I want to, the next semester or the next year, show my students examples of previous artifacts, I don't even have access to them. The new version has changed, you know, ArcGIS moved to the Esri site, whatever, these things. So I just want you to maybe address some of the issues you might have about originality and authenticity when using exploiting these affordances, as we say, but not really manipulating them yourself as the author.
Could just make a note, because there's a program that some of my students will use. So in my upper level class, I give them 4 choices for a final project. They can write a paper, they can do a studio art project, they can do a digital exhibition, or they could do some kind of 3D modeling thing. Most people will go with a studio project or a digital exhibition, but there's a program called Art Steps. Have you ever heard of this, anybody? It's like a 3D walkthrough, and you can put images on the wall and little captions next to this. So it's like a little art gallery. And some of my students like to use that, and I really am disappointed in it because of that point. There's really not much you can do except just put some pictures and like a caption on there. And I'm like, this doesn't really feel like a final project. It just feels like you took some slides and stuck them on the wall. And so trying to kind of get them to the point of like, let's actually integrate some research here, but then how, you know, it's a pretty confined program as I understand it. So you could put a bigger thing on the wall with some text, but it sort of, that's about it. So I totally feel that frustration. And I've taken to the point now where when someone proposes that, I'm kind of like, well, have you thought about other options? Let's meet and discuss some things. But it's one I think that they probably have used in some of their studio classes for, here's my portfolio, whatever. But yeah, that one has been frustrating for me, for sure. Originality and authenticity. Maybe I'll think about that and let Erin go.
So I don't have experience with this in teaching, but I do, as part of helping with project management with faculty and students, I try not to introduce the which platform are we going to use too early in the planning process for the project, because I don't want it to limit how they create, what they plan to include, what functionality they're hoping to achieve. I like to have them think through all of those things before looking at platform options, so that when they get to the point of looking at platform options, they can say, well, that one doesn't do a major thing that I want this project to have. So I'm not going to allow that platform to limit my digital, end product. So that's something I like to do when planning projects with faculty and students. Is just, we're not going to have that conversation right now. You map out everything that you want this, ideally that you want this project to do, and then we'll see if we can find a platform that fits that or fits most of that. But we're not going to do that part first.
Yeah, I would say similarly, I haven't so much run into this in instruction per se as that, but I've definitely run into it with helping people with their research posters. And as you described, kind of helping people scope or kind of think through projects. It's interesting that you frame it as originality. When I think about this, I've often thought of it in terms of intentionality, that people who are maybe unfamiliar with the software or the process aren't thinking about their intentions and making intentional choices. They're kind of looking at the space and filling it as kind of picking up the vibe, right? Of like, this has the energy I want, without really looking at the structure, and then kind of cramming stuff into however the structure works. One way I tend to approach this kind of similarly is to think about what they actually want and then how that maps to affordances first. And a specific way I tend to have them do it when working on a poster or something like that is to actually just draw it first. Like, we're not going to look at templates. We're not going to look at themes. We're not even going to think about color. Let's go to the whiteboard and just kind of sketch out, like, here's a list of all the stuff you want to include. Here's about how much space it'll take up. Now, based on how you want someone to read your poster, how could we kind of fit these things together in this space? And then we'll go and kind of work through the digital thing and try to fit that to the original intention. Now, the drawback of this kind of thing when you're working in a really limited platform can be the same problem I have when I go clothes shopping, which is that you have something super specific in mind and then just get really frustrated that you can't find it, right? But I think it does kind of at least help them recognize that, oh, okay, I have to adjust my vision rather than I have to conform, instead of thinking through what's possible rather than starting with what's permissible, if that makes sense.
That's a really good question, Sarah. I think I would only add, I also think about it in terms of process over product in this sense. So maybe I've gone rogue post tenure, but I don't care really about grading the end project or what it really looks like in terms of visibility or, what I'm actually seeing visually on the screen. I want them to communicate what their goals were to me. So I want them to walk me through and reflect what looks good here to you, what doesn't. And sometimes that's actually something they're turning in, a blog post on a, discussion blog on Canvas, or maybe it's a conversation in the presentation, post talking about that final digital project. But I don't care. What I want them to do is articulate to me what the process was like and what they learned from the process. And part of I shouldn't say I do care, but part of that, I think, approach for me is that we know students come into the classroom with a wide array of digital skills, right? We cannot and we do not assume that students are already going to have those skills, even though we continue to think about, this very much this dichotomy of the digital natives and the digital immigrants, and that students know how to do it. They don't. So I also, just operate on the understanding that some students do not have these skills before they come into our classes. And so in a course that has really communicative goals, it's more important to me as an instructor that they're communicating and reflecting and thinking about the process throughout the project. There's no good answer. It's a really good, I think, kind of thought and question, because it's going to continue to be a challenge. I think even for me, in terms of like transparency as an instructor, and I'm thinking about like the TILT framework, like this transparency in learning and teaching, is to encourage students from the beginning of any project that they're already thinking about the process over the end goal, but that's a really thoughtful question. Thank you.
I'll just add, I thought about that question of originality and authenticity too. I mentioned that in these classes, I also have studio projects, and I realized that I don't really know how to deal with like somebody hands in a painting and I'm like, okay, how do I grade this? So I asked one of my studio grad students, how do you deal with these things? And she was great. She said that the three kind of principles that they use in evaluations and like a critique is concept, execution, and creativity. And I've taken to just really like hammering people on concept all the way through, kind of the so what question. And I think that helps with this question of sort of originality and authenticity. Like, okay, cool, you've got a bunch of paintings hanging on a wall. Who cares? Can you tell me why these are here and push the concept? So that's probably how I deal with that, is get them to articulate, why they're doing what they're doing and what they're trying to get across.
It's a really great discussion. I think there's a lot to be said there with, in some manner, all of y'all brought up that kind of digital literacy component, understanding what the outcome is and how the research either interfaces with it or not. And the reflection component, which seems to be built into all of it as well, and would encourage, like, if not a discussion, incorporating that in the digital project in some way, talk about process. And things like that as just a manner of course, in the way that studio folks have a concept statement, or you're writing a paper. I mean, that's the process. You're laying it out, right? Your methodology, et cetera. It's no different, I think, for digital. It's just easier to obscure it. And so making that intentional as part of that, the digital pedagogy component, I think, is a really great thing to take away. Thank you all. Any other questions?
Hello all, I'm Greg Bailey. I'm the head of the Special Collections University Archives here at Iowa State. So really my question was for you, Nikki, when you were talking about this course that you were working with the faculty member on, and we're, internally here at ISU, especially here at the library, wanting to start partnering more with us with DSI, but also faculty members outside, and try to get more people in using our materials. And for me, one of those things when you're talking about that is what that impact had on the archives. I know obviously students are coming in doing research, but you're building a digital project. So what that means for digitization of those materials and having them put together and flagged and then get digitized for a project that is going to be hosted online potentially, and what that looks like versus, is this a quick copy versus we're just going to digitize this for preservation purposes?
So as I kind of mentioned, there had been a thought that it would be a fully public digital project. At this point, that has not fully been the case. Well, that hasn't been the case. So the assignments are closed. Some of the materials they use, we have a digital copy already in the Iowa Digital Library. My understanding is that otherwise students are kind of so there's teaching days that they also have with the archives, and that there's like kind of a similar workflow to what's going on with me, where there are days they go to the archives and there's like a teaching session with the archivist, and then other days are kind of open work days where there's students kind of going up there in batches and working hands-on with the archivist to identify the materials they want and doing, like a quick scan. For a few years, we had them just taking pictures on their phone. That was an interesting experience that led to a fantastic variety of new art objects. But so at present, there's not really a workflow to make those items that are being scanned by the students public. They're pretty scattershot in terms of coverage too. I am really interested in talking as we continue to develop the course and kind of make a decision as to whether, do we just want to close this entirely and sort of cut off this idea of making it public and kind of make it more about the student experience of putting together the exhibit? Or do we want to work more specifically with IWA to identify collections that they want to digitize and kind of incorporate this into the workflow so that the students can be kind of working together with IWA staff? So I can't speak to whether it's I guess I'm limited on the details, but it hasn't kicked off a big digitization effort or anything like that, if that answers your question. Huh? Oh, it's the Iowa Women's Archives. Apologies. Thanks.
Erin, you mentioned the pizza thing. I'm not a student, but pizza and Ames, is that one actually alive? No.
Conversation up here, they were definitely arguing about how to judge pizza. It was a thing.
Not us.
The students, yes. It's almost lunchtime, so rumble might happen. We have 4 minutes, so time for maybe one more question from the audience. Yeah.
Gloria Betcher, Department of English, and I'm going to be talking this afternoon in the public history or public humanities session. And as I was sitting here listening to your presentations, I was thinking about the overlap or lack of overlap between what you're doing with your classes and what we're doing with the Tracing Race Initiative and other digital humanities efforts for the public sphere. And I'm wondering to what extent you see what you're doing in those classes as related to the kinds of things that public digital scholars are doing. I know you've talked about whether you're going to limit the access to the projects to just the class, but it seems like a lot of the things that Erin was talking about, I remember going through with her when we were setting up our project. And it feels like this is a much larger ecosystem than just what are my students doing in class, but how is it useful outside the classroom for them or for you or for your colleagues? Well, I suppose, yeah. And I'm one of those analog people who used to teach 20 years ago a course on computers in the study of English, where I had to teach students how to do HTML coding and how to use Flash and create things with Flash. And my students had a lot more originality and freedom when they were coding their own materials than when they started to have access to things like Dreamweaver and Weebly sites and that sort of thing. So I'll stop talking.
So I'm going to both answer your question and not answer your question because it actually kind of, I think where I tend to spend a lot of time thinking about the overlap of student digital projects and like larger public projects actually is more it's often brought up to me or becomes a point that I'm thinking a lot about more in terms of labor than necessarily sort of the audience impact or kind of the external impact. Because I think I more often run into a situation of a project where there is a fair amount of content or analysis or data entry labor that needs to happen. And making sure that if students are being involved in that in a course setting, that there are still clear learning outcomes for them and they are getting something out of it, rather than it being, oh, I have this convenient batch of 30 students that I'm just going to have, make a spreadsheet, has been a challenge that needs to be approached with delicacy, right? So that's actually where my mind tends to go in thinking about those sorts of things, is like when we have students working in class on a larger public digital project, how are they being credited? How are they understanding their role in that project? And what kind of curbs or mechanisms are there in place for them to choose not to engage? Are we in FERPA compliance? Like, that's kind of where my mind goes in thinking about how those two things overlap. I think in terms of women in sport, there was initially more of a I was kind of more looking toward like, how is this working toward a kind of public set of displays? As time has gone on, we've become more and more focused on kind of internally, what are we teaching the students, and less worried about, are we going to make this public? I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of what's on my mind generally in terms of the intersection of student coursework and public projects.
I would only add, and I think in the courses that I teach, I try to just make sure that there are lots of examples of digital archives of public humanities projects so that students are able to see those, to work with them, so they're seeing examples, they're signed examples of OER resources so that they're aware these options exist. Like from a personal scholarly perspective, I was trained in part as a digital humanist, and now I'm not sure I would define that way, because I'm just a humanist that uses digital tools, period. I think like 15, 20 years ago, it was a different, we had a different approach to conceptualizing those things and seeing them as two separate entities. Like, you were either a digital humanist or you weren't, because you couldn't use those tools. Now I personally see it as digital scholarship is scholarship and digital humanities is humanities. And I think that's how students see it now. But if we don't let them see those examples and test out those tools and understand and converse with them about what digital humanities is, or just what public humanities, writ large is, then they can't even they can't talk about it or understand it unless we're, I think, helping them to see those examples and giving them access to those examples and using them and teaching with those resources too, I think is really key.
I might add, just from my perspective too, I've heard everybody talking about the importance of data. And I think that data and kind of what the institution has and then what the classes are all about all need to line up for a good public project. So if I'm teaching on ancient Mesopotamia, well, the Stanley Museum of Art has lots of African objects, but nothing from Mesopotamia. We don't have anything relevant on campus. So, I don't have kind of a way in to do a public project on something that I'm teaching the class about, or that my research interests are in. So that's always been a challenge, at least for me as someone who works in the ancient world. I don't have data to work with, at least on campus.
I think part of your question was, what do they do with this after the class with these skills? And I think a lot of the skills that I touched on ultimately are about how to be a critical consumer and an intentional creator of things online. And also, looking behind the website that you're seeing and thinking through what it took to build that and where those pieces came from. And all of those components are important, and understanding, how much should you believe this thing that you found online? What were the motivations behind it? Things like that. So I think those broader skills are, applicable for your whole life.
All right. Well, we are at lunchtime. Please join me in thanking our wonderful panelists. Did you want to say something?
So thank you all. I realized earlier I forgot to introduce myself. I'm the head of digital scholarship and initiatives. My name is Olivia Weichel. And I wanted to kind of describe what we're doing for lunch. We're doing dine-arounds. So we have a document that can be accessed in the lunch part of the digital scholarship symposium guide. We have QR codes around the room for that. Some of you have signed up. We've tried to make little groups going to different places around town. So if you can take a look at that, or you can come up here and kind of see if you've signed up for a group who you're with. We'll kind of gather in groups around the room and then head out. You don't have to do this. You can go have lunch on your own, kind of regroup and come back for the afternoon, or you can go somewhere else. So if you're looking for a recommendation that's not on here, talk to anybody from Iowa State, and they can point you to places in Campus Town, or there's food trucks nearby, or downtown. We have plenty of time. We don't have to be back for our second panel. That's until it starts at 2:30, and that's just in the room right across from here. So plenty of time to explore, take some time, eat, and converse with each other. So I will go through, and maybe people who are kind of leading the lunches, I'll have them raise their hands. So if you don't know who you're going to lunch with, maybe look around and get an idea. So we have campus, so Cafe Baudelaire, Michael